Hi, I'm the Gun Penguin. This is going to be kind of a strange video. It's not a review of a product or some sort of long-term endurance test. Instead, this is a video about the state of the gun community, and we're going to have some hard discussions here about some things that have happened in 2020 and the way things are moving into 2021, so that hopefully we can do things better in the future, because I believe in us. I think that we're capable of doing great things, but we have some seriously toxic tendencies that are never addressed. And the gun community has grown a lot in 2020. A lot of folks who never thought they'd be buying firearms are now gun owners. And I think that makes it more important than ever to talk about these issues. This is gonna be a little bit more off the cuff than usual, so forgive my ramblings. Also, I've partnered with Tacticool Girlfriend for this video. She is one of my absolute favorite YouTubers. If you're not watching her channel, you really should be. Go subscribe right now. She is awesome. And hopefully between the two of us, we can provide a balanced and fair look at these issues. So first, the gun community needs to confront this sort of ideological paradox where the gun community fears one type of authority while blindly supporting another. And I think you know what I mean. The gun community is overall wildly anti-government while being very pro-police. The gun community acts as though its protests against governmental interference with the Second Amendment is something that we need to stand up. In some cases, they say that we should violently stand up against it, but when we see other groups standing up against police oppression and other types of oppression sanctioned by the state, the gun community says, no, your grief and your grievances are not legitimate, only ours are. You have no right to protest and to, in some cases, threaten violence, even though the gun community would do exactly the same thing. Why is that? Why are the issues that other people have illegitimate and yours are somehow completely legitimate? That makes no sense. That's not right, is it? Consider this. If you fear a tyrannical state and you fear tyrannical measures put in place by that state, who's going to enforce that? It's going to be your local police force. That's who. And so the Second Amendment grants us parity of force with those who would oppress us, right? Like I think we can all agree that that's the intention there. Well, in recent years, the police have been gifted a lot of leftover used military equipment, stuff from the war on terror. That is what's going to be directly used against you should any sort of tyrannical measures that you fear be put in place, and it will be used on you by your local police force, right? So why can't we say anything about that? Why can't we question that? Why is that off limits while it's okay to freely criticize all of these other things? That's not fair. The gun community has always talked about boots in the streets, right? Well, those boots are gonna be police boots. But to quote my friend Deviant Olem, this is not an indictment of the police, this is an indictment of policing. That's very important. And now the gun community is calling for the police to crush the protests when they themselves have repeatedly, over the smallest infringement, cried out that we need to rise up violently against the central government or the state government or whatever they see as the enemy at the time. That's not ideologically consistent, is it? It's just because you like the police and you don't like the protesters. It's that simple. That's not fair though, is it? And now we have oppressed groups that are literally fighting in the streets for their freedoms. And you call on this representative of authority, the police, to crush them. That does not make any sense, does it? So why do you deserve your freedoms and they don't deserve theirs? Why are your freedoms more valuable and more important? And who are you to decide whose freedoms are most valuable and most important? Think about that long and hard, please. I want you to really think about that. And remember, in many cases, those oppressed groups are fighting for the right to live peacefully and not be murdered for no damn good reason by those representatives of that authority.
I can't tell you how many times I've seen a blue line sticker on the same pane of glass as a come and take it sticker. To me, that is extremely ideologically concerning and inconsistent. I don't know what you stand for when you say those things. I don't know if you know what you stand for when you say those things. I would say you probably should figure yourself out, but it's curious to me. It's common in the 2A community, and I don't really understand why. Hopefully maybe somebody can let me know. I'm genuinely curious, but I'll at least tell you what my thoughts are on it. When you are talking about Second Amendment rights, you're talking about owning firearms. When you say come and take it, it means that you are very staunch in your belief that we should have the right to own firearms to defend ourselves. That's generally the premise of it, and it's something that I agree with completely. I'm all for it. But why then would you be also cheering on the authorities that would be taking your firearms away in such an event where they would be? That does not make sense to me. That's interesting. I don't know why there is this strange detachment of authority from the execution of duties that would preclude you losing your firearms. That's, I think, honestly more of a reflection of some of the more problematic attitudes in the firearms community, where we believe in authority when it works for certain people, and not so much in unilaterally understanding authority as something that should always be questioned and should always be challenged when we believe it's pragmatic to do so. I think one of the most notable times in which the state did actually try to take away firearms, or at least people's rights to exercise firearms freely, would be the 1966 Mulford Act in California. That specifically was backed by the NRA, actually, and passed by Ronald Reagan in an attempt to curb the activities of the Black Panthers and their organizing in the streets. This was absolutely an attempt to defang that organization and its ability that it had to hold power in the streets as an organization of very marginalized folks who were just simply trying to assert their right to exist and to be able to defend themselves if that right was ever threatened. So just a good historical example to keep in mind. And when it comes to the ineffectiveness of gun control, as we all know, the 1994 assault weapons ban was a huge flop. It didn't do anything. So those are just a couple of historical examples of where the state did actually successfully interdict in the citizen's right to own a firearm. Were those laws that were passed actually effective in curbing firearm-related violence? No, of course not. They were specifically meant to actually assert this power of the state over the citizen to own such firearms. So, needless to say, I think that we all generally tend to agree that we know that the right to own firearms is constantly under a threat by the state, and that's good. I think that we can all get on the same page with that. But the difference here is that I think a lot of people are not really as critical of where that structurally would be executed. That would be executed by your police. We should not turn a blind eye to authority in the sense of the people who actually carry out the orders of authority at gunpoint. So I do think that we need to be a bit more critical and be a bit more consistent in regards to this. And that also means that if such laws were ever passed, that we understand that the first people who would be targeted are always going to be the most marginalized people who have historically and repeatedly been targeted by authorities for violence. And such authorities do actually contain the lion's share of violence in society in general, both domestically and abroad. And we're oftentimes told through gun control that this is for our own safety when the authorities are the ones who still get to keep the guns. And that is an extremely troubling and extremely dissonant message. So I just want to say that I think that we should all be a bit more understanding that, between you and I think we can agree that we want the same things in life. We want to live a fulfilling, prosperous life and be healthy and not get killed by the authorities kicking down our doors. So that being said, we should extend solidarity to one another in the gun community, especially those who are most marginalized when it comes to folks arming themselves to actually really defend their lives and not just be using guns as a fetishistic object or a status symbol, but truly a tool in which they are exercising that right. So please try to be a bit more understanding of this, be a bit more critical, be more consistent, and look after each other. We can really truly be in this together, and I really think that we need to be a bit more cognizant of that.
Let's talk a little bit about gear and training in full kit. So one day I'm at the range and I've got my JPC on and my awesome fancy belt and my Safariland holster and all that stuff. And this guy walks past me and he says, "You must think you're pretty cool, don't you, wearing all that stuff?" And I stopped and thought for a second and said, "If you knew me, you know I've been described as many things, but cool has never been one of them. However, I do like knowing how to reload my rifle. I think that's a good skill to have, right?" And even now, there is a stigma against training in full kit at the majority of ranges that I've ever been to, at least in my neck of the woods. And I don't really understand this. So we're encouraged to have the stuff, to have the plate carrier and the holster and all that stuff. A lot of folks act as though you're not a good gun owner unless you own all that stuff, which is completely untrue. Just fucking buy whatever you feel like you should have. But if you own all that stuff and you felt like it was a good idea to buy all that stuff, how are you gonna know how any of it works if you don't go and train in it? And don't take my word for it, do an experiment. Buy a new piece of kit and go to the range having never used it before and try to do some fancy new reload and see what happens. You'll be dropping your magazines all over the ground, your pouches will come open and spill everything out on the ground. It'll make a big mess. You have to put in that time to know how any of this works. If you expect that you'll be able to throw your kit on when the time comes, walk out into the world and use it in any sort of effective way, you're incredibly mistaken. Training in your kit is necessary to be effective. And I don't just mean that it'll help you hone the skills that you already have. I mean that you will be physically incapable of doing any of the things that you need to do unless you put that time in. Just putting on your belt at the range and shooting all of your stuff, that's not anything like wearing a carrier. Everything is in a different place. The rifle shoulders differently. Your magazines are all in a different location. Reaching your belt is different because you have to get around the carrier. You're also wearing now, an additional 40 pounds on your body or more. It's a completely different experience. And I think this kind of brings us to another issue. We don't treat shooting like a martial art, do we? But it is. It's no different than anything else. It's no different than BJJ or whatever else you're into. Shooting is a martial art. And as much stigma as there is within the gun community against wearing your full kit, it can't compare to the stigma that there is outside of the gun community. So as much as we need to educate other gun owners on the idea that shooting is a martial art, we really need to do some hard work with folks who don't shoot. So educate your friends who don't shoot on how much time and mental effort you put into this. Show them that you're working on body mechanics and applying tourniquets quickly and all of those things that we do, and show them that it's also an issue of safety, being able to get to your medical equipment quickly and apply that stuff, and also manipulate and move your gun around safely. You have to practice so that you're not a danger to yourself and others. And you may find that you don't treat shooting as a martial art, so take some steps to fix that. Make sure that you're dry firing as often as you can. I personally dry fire for about half an hour a day, 5 days a week, if not 7, depending on what I've got going on. I put on all my kit any chance I get and run through reload drills, and I work on getting a hold of my tourniquet and opening my medical stuff and whatever else I feel like I need to work on. I also make sure that everything is where I like for it to be, because sometimes if you don't practice in your gear, you won't have that moment where you realize, oh man, that magazine is in the wrong place, or my medical stuff cannot be accessed quickly where I have it. Now, how are you gonna know that if you don't use your stuff? You have to put that time in. It's critical.
Everybody gets into firearms for a different reason. Everybody has different firearms and different gear that they train with and different methods of training, and that's totally okay. Your use case will dictate what you do, and it may not be the same as anybody else's, and that's totally fine. But when it comes to equipment, your kit is part of your gun system. And when talking about kit, that could be a number of things. That could be your chest rig, where you keep your magazines in. That could be a plate carrier. That could be a backpack. It could be a belt with magazine pouches on it. It could be a purse that you have your concealed carry piece in with a spare magazine. It could be an in-waistband holster. I mean, the sky's the limit. Depends entirely on what you're doing. But regardless of what you are doing, one thing's for certain, no matter what, you need to train with it. And for some reason, there is a stigma against training in gear by some people. And this is really interesting to me because if we're training with a firearm component, why aren't we training with the rest of the firearm components that are ancillary to the firearm itself? We need to be able to understand how we use all the gear that is essential to using the firearm. Firearms don't end necessarily at the firearms. Most oftentimes they don't. Most oftentimes people are carrying things like magazines at the very least to reload with if they're carrying a firearm. And if you're not, I strongly recommend that you do. But beyond that, maybe you carry a tourniquet with you, which I think is a great idea. If you're going to be making holes, you should always be able to plug holes. And that can include an IFAK, that could include a home defense rig, if you have a chest rig or even a helmet even. I don't know what you do, but whatever you do, train in all of it, not just one thing. The gun is only one part of your equation. And for anybody to reduce self-defense to one tool, I think that's extremely foolish. So realize that this is, truly a martial art. And so you should treat it like that. You should take a holistic approach to it. So when it comes to training with your kit, that means going to the range in your full kit as much as you possibly can. This also means dry fire practicing in your kit as much as you can. I think we should all be dry firing more often than we're going to the range, especially in this economy. And I'm a big proponent of just making sure that you're getting the most out of your training by incorporating and replicating as much as you can where you'd realistically be using your gun in a situation and using the kit with it. This also doesn't have to mean that you're necessarily even manipulating a firearm with your kit. I would say if you're doing something more overt, like wearing a plate carrier, wear it around the house, do chores in it. You'll learn some limitations of your kit even by just doing that and getting yourself kind of inoculated to wearing something like that. If you don't do it often, you're not going to be set up very well for the future if you were to ever rely on that. And that brings me to another point. If we're not using firearms, we can also train in kit if we're doing stuff that's more overt. And one great way to do this is to play airsoft. And before people absolutely cancel me in the comments here, just know that I very much understand the limitations of airsoft as a training tool, but people who carry a gun professionally oftentimes train with simunitions, which honestly is just a fancier version of airsoft. Airsoft is a layperson's simunitions, and it's very accessible and is a great way to get dirty, to run around, learn the limitations of your kit, use it under stress and pressure. And I think that's honestly the biggest takeaway that I've experienced from playing airsoft is truly diagnosing what works and what doesn't with my kit. So just being able to replicate those things in situations where you may not be able to do at the range as easily is an extremely valuable training tool in of itself. So don't discount that as just a LARPing thing. I would say don't LARP, but I mean, if you do, that's okay too. Just don't treat that as training. But do treat training as like being physical with your kit and using it. That's always going to provide you very, very valuable feedback. Also, as I stated before, make sure that you're carrying an IFAK. I don't care if it's a big dorky pouch that you wear in your belt line or on the back of a backpack at the range. If anybody gives you shit for that, then I don't know what to tell you. You're in the right, they're in the wrong. You're going to be a much more responsible gun owner if you're able to actually attend to gunshot wounds. Let's just be real. That's the bottom line. So don't be afraid to train in your kit. Always train in your kit, actually.
The gun community doesn't always view shooting as fun, I've noticed. So I know I said that we have to treat shooting as a legitimate martial art, and that's true, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be incredibly fun. We spend so much time focusing on the tacticality of stuff that we forget that shooting is supposed to be really, really awesome. That's why you started shooting, right? You didn't start shooting because it's boring. you started shooting because it's awesome. Shooting guns is fun. I've enjoyed shooting every gun that I've ever shot, even the guns that kind of sucked. I still loved it, right? Sometimes hours pass at the range and I don't even notice. I wish I lived there and just shot guns all day. That would be fantastic. But do you ever find that you can't motivate yourself to actually get your stuff together and put it in the car and make the drive out there? Yeah, we all know a lot of people who just go to the range 2 or 3 times a year and you have to practically drag them out there. Well, we do the things that we want to do. We do the things that are fun. And there are 2 things you can do that will make the range so fun that you won't be able to stay away. First, you've got to figure out what you enjoy about shooting in the first place. I'll give you 2 examples. So for me, I love nylon gear. I love trying new magazine pouches that might shave some time off of a reload, or a new belt that might make everything easier to grab, or a new plate carrier that helps me move a little bit faster. I get a lot out of that. In fact, I get more out of trying a new belt than I do out of buying a new 9mm plastic pistol that's really not that different from all the other 9mm plastic pistols that I've already got, right? And it's because nylon is the lens through which I focus on performance and technique and drill those things. So you've got to find something that you can use to drill those things yourself. That's critical. It's the only thing that's going to keep you at the range. Here's another example. I love small blowback European pocket pistols. I love them. And so I like to take these old, seemingly worthless guns and apply modern techniques to them and see how they perform. That's incredibly fun to me. I love it. I could do it all day. But the second big thing is to learn to live in the moment at the range. Just enjoy being there for the sake of the experience, right? So often we focus on the acquisition of new guns and gear, right? But you bought the gun to take it to the range and shoot it. It's easy to forget that we buy the guns to shoot them. We don't shoot so that we can buy more guns, right? So if you need help rekindling your love of training, explore the stuff that you already have. Choose one of your guns and focus on that gun. Decide to learn it backwards and forwards. Learn everything there is to know about handling that gun in different circumstances. Put thousands of rounds through it. Truly learn it. Become an expert on that platform. And then when you've gotten there, then you'll not only build a bond with the gun, but you'll also have a better idea. Do I really need something else? Or is this gun that I already have actually fulfilling all of my needs? You will probably find that it is. Or at the very least, it won't be quite so pressing that you buy something new, right?
As I said before, everybody picks up a gun for a different reason, and we all have our own motivations, and that could be target shooting, that could be training for defensive purposes, could be skeet shooting. I mean, whatever you're into, just pursue that passion. Know why you got into firearms in the first place, and whatever motivates you, chase that. Make sure that you're doing what you want to do. Don't do what others tell you to do with a firearm. I think that's the most valuable lesson I've learned. And don't let people discourage you. You should be receptive to criticism. You should be receptive to changing your habits, but don't let people take the joy away from you. I think that's an incredibly important thing for me. One thing that makes firearm ownership fun, I think, is challenging yourself. This is a perishable skill, so we should always be trying to get better at what we're doing. And that doesn't mean setting unrealistic goals where you're going to burn yourself out and get frustrated. It doesn't mean that you have to start doing 3-gun matches to compete against other people. I just mean setting very realistic, small, achievable goals to slightly improve yourself every time you go shooting. And that could be as simple as getting a shot timer to run time drills and try to shave off 1/10 of a second of each drill that you're running. That could mean tightening those groups on paper. And it could mean introducing movement and physical activity to your drills and obstacles and such like that. Just making it more interesting and creating a realistic environment where you truly feel that you are being rewarded for your efforts. So just keep that in mind. I think that we should always be trying to be better at what we do. And firearm ownership is no exception here. Lastly, one of the most key components here in my experience for making guns fun is finding a community. Make it social. I mean, this is a perfect opportunity for us to bond over a common hobby that we have. And there's nothing worse than going to the range and just being surrounded by a bunch of weirdos that you don't know. That's going to be very alienating, and probably is not going to encourage you to keep shooting. So I say, early on in your journey as a shooter, you should be very, very quickly trying to establish connections with other friends and friendly folks that you want to go shooting with and spend time with at the range.
Last of all, we need to talk about the panic buying. And I know right now the world is scary. It might seem like a great idea to buy 50 more guns and 2,000 cases of ammo, but we artificially created this panic. Most of us have plenty of guns and ammo as it is. If you shoot a lot, you probably had a significant ammo stockpile as it is. And instead, since we bought up all of the ammo and all of the guns, the folks who really needed it, the folks who were just getting into the sport, there are no guns or ammo left for them. This new group of gun owners is very diverse, and they're gonna bolster our numbers well into the next century. We really need them. They've grown our sport massively, and they needed those guns and that ammo, and we took it away from them. So what are they gonna shoot? What are they gonna buy? Finally they saw things our way. We convinced them that, buying a gun would be a really good idea. And then they get to the store and there's no ammo because we're hoarding it. That's really not good. So we entirely created this situation. If we had just been a bit more sensible, none of that would have happened. There would still be some ammo on the shelves and there would have been enough for everybody to keep training. So these new folks, they need to train with their guns to love the sport. You have to spend that time shooting to really get it. Anybody who shoots for an extended period of time is gonna realize, wow, guns are really fun, but how are they gonna do that if they can't get any ammo, right? And how do I know? Well, I co-own a gun store. The gun community loves some fear mongering, right? There's always there are those whispers in the gun shop. The end is near. It's all happening. It's right around the corner. The country's coming apart, and there are going to be no guns left. This has been happening for the 2 decades that I've been in the gun community. The world has been ending the whole time, as far as I've been able to tell from talking to folks at gun shops. It's just the way it is. The gun community is sort of like the physical embodiment of the Tower tarot card, right? It's all doom and gloom and destruction. The end is here, it's happening. Everything that you have ever known is coming apart. On the one hand, yes, things are impermanent and can end at any point in time. But you can't just declare that every moment is the end. It starts to mean nothing. The gun community is Chicken Little. We're forever running around saying the sky is falling, the sky is falling. It's not. Instead of crying that this is the end, think for a second. It would do far more for the Second Amendment, for every person in America to be able to go out and purchase one gun and a reasonable amount of ammo to keep in their home than it would for you to have 10 more guns and thousands of rounds of ammo that you didn't have before to accompany the thousands and thousands of rounds that you already have. Wouldn't it have worked out better for us in the long run to make sure that everybody had some than a very few had it all, right? Wouldn't that have worked out better, right? Wouldn't that have helped us more for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of new people to be able to join our sport? And I hear from folks all the time who say, I can't get a gun. There's no way. And consider earlier what we said about protests. Now that groups that you don't understand are arming themselves and protesting and demonstrating how much they want change from the way things are now, you're stockpiling weapons more than you already were to oppose them violently if you feel you need to. They have as much right as you do to arm themselves against a tyrannical power structure. Why is that okay for you and not for them? Remember that freedom for them is freedom for you in exactly the same way. Freedom for people you dislike is still freedom for you. And again, don't catastrophize. This is not the end of the world. This is not the end of all things. It's gonna be okay, I promise. Panic buying does nothing. You have enough guns, you have enough ammo, and when we panic buy, we create an artificial situation. If calls to my shop are representative of purchasing habits across the nation, About 60% of the calls that I've received have been from women and people of color who are concerned and would like to buy a firearm. But I don't have any to sell them because folks who already have 30 guns bought all of my stock. If each person who'd called me had been able to get a gun, a really good gun, something quality, and some ammo to sort of learn how it works and learn that shooting is really fun, we would have created a lot of lifelong supporters of the Second Amendment. That would have really helped us out a lot. Also, the reaction to COVID has been this weird duality within the gun community. So a lot of folks within the community will deny that COVID exists or deny its deadliness, yet stockpile weapons. So is it or is it not a serious issue? And I understand that I'm reducing your argument, but I want you to hear it explained so plainly. It's absurd when you think about it. Instead, COVID is a disease. It's just a disease. It's a very, very deadly disease. You can't ignore the numbers. It's tremendously deadly. But at the same time, it is not the end of all things. We will overcome this as we've overcome many things in the past. It's another challenge, another bump in the road, although it is a huge bump in the road. So instead of taking one of these two extreme views, why don't you look at it realistically? And also, it's just a disease, so stockpiling weapons doesn't do anything to fix the disease. You can't shoot a disease to death, can you? Bullets are not a vaccination against COVID-19.
Panic buying. Yes, panic buying. Theme of the year for 2020, among many other horrible things. Kind of like toilet paper, except toilet paper normalized eventually. But that was, kind of impossible to get for a while for no good reason. But with ammo, it's just getting worse. It keeps getting worse every day. And it doesn't seem like it's getting better anytime soon in 2021. So I think that this is a huge issue in the gun community. And I get it. Things are pretty weird right now between COVID, social strife, and the election. People are freaking out, and I don't blame them. I don't blame them one bit. We're all scared, and you have every right to be. So just know that. But also know that these things are all temporary. When you panic buy, are you really buying things because you need them, or are you projecting some very irrational fears into a material quantity where it may greatly exceed anything that you could possibly ever need? That is the question I want to ask you. I just want to pump the brakes here a little bit and just say that we should be pragmatic in our purchases and that we should not let fear dictate our actions and not turn us into freakish hoarders. We can absolutely do better. And again, I get that people are afraid and that they have a good reason to. Maybe there's a very good reason that we've seen a huge influx of new firearm owners in the community. And that's great. We should celebrate that. We should rejoice that. And we should take those people under our wings and set good examples for them and educate them. Make sure that they're handling firearms safely and responsibly and not rob them of the opportunities to actually utilize their firearms and train with them. And at a certain point, you got to admit that buying your way into your fear is a very unhealthy obsession, and that the best gear you have is the gear you own, and that the best training is the training that's specialized in said gear. There gets to be a certain point where you actually are detracting from your skills and capabilities by owning too much stuff. So if you're good, if you got what you need, then call it good. You're fine. If you have 20,000 plus rounds of whatever caliber, I'm going to start to question what you're doing. Honestly, in a perfect world, if there were just bullets growing on trees, I would say, you do you. But that's definitely not the case right now. It's making everything suck for everybody. And it's frustrating. It's extremely frustrating to me. And I'm still at least able to somewhat afford a little bit of plinking ammo for when I go to the range, but barely. Thanks to my Patreon supporters, that's basically where all my Patreon money goes, is just buying rounds for me to shoot just, a few hundred rounds at the range. So I say we should make sure that we moderate what we're doing, make sure that we take inventory of what we need, and not splurge in excess because we're freaking out. Ground yourselves in reality and be pragmatic about what you do. And make sure that you're creating a room for a healthier, growing, and flourishing gun community, because it is truly growing. So let's work on the flourishing part here.
So let's work to help each other to get through this incredibly difficult time and to behave reasonably. We can do it. I know we can. We can absolutely behave reasonably. So here's what I want you to do. Either make friends with a new shooter at the range or take someone new to the range yourself. Show them that the gun community is generous and friendly. Show them that we're really great people and that we have a lot to offer, but most importantly, show them that we're ready to grow. All right, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you accompanying us on this tour through the present state of the gun community. I hope 2021 is an excellent year for all of you. I hope it's a lot better than 2020. A big thank you to Tacticool Girlfriend for joining me for this video. She's really, really awesome, and I encourage you to go and subscribe to her channel. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I'll talk to you soon. Good night.